Before everything fell apart, I thought I understood what loneliness meant. But nothing could have prepared me for the real betrayal that was about to unfold. One moment, I was just a forgotten old woman, clinging to my daily routines. The next, my entire world turned upside down, in ways I never could have imagined. Stick around, and don't forget to subscribe and tell me where you're watching from. Routine was the only thing holding me together. Every Monday, rain or shine, I walked 2 blocks to the little market on Main Street. Same time, same list. Bread, milk, a few apples, maybe a chocolate bar if I felt reckless. Spokane wasn't a big city, but at 73 years old, even its quiet streets felt too fast for me sometimes. I lived alone, had been, ever since Harold died 15 years ago and David moved away to chase a life of his own. I didn't blame him. Young people had their own dreams. Still, the house felt colder every year. Most days, the only voice I heard belonged to the radio playing old country songs in my kitchen. And every week, without fail, I bought a lottery ticket. Same numbers always. David's birthday, my wedding anniversary, and my mother's lucky charm numbers she used to swear by. It was just a habit, a thread tying me to the past. I never believed I'd win. Whoever does. That Monday didn't seem different at all. I tucked my scarf around my neck, pulled my worn shopping cart behind me, and braced myself against the brisk autumn wind. Leaves crunched under my feet as I made my way down the cracked sidewalk toward Granger's Market. Inside, the smell of overripe bananas and detergent filled the air. I moved slowly, choosing my items one by one. Bread, milk, apples, chocolate bar. I smiled faintly to myself, a small rebellion against my sugar ban. By the time I got in line, my legs ached from standing too long. The line stretched almost to the back of the store, a sea of tired faces and full carts. I leaned heavily on my cart for balance, feeling the familiar throb in my knees. It was then that I noticed the television bolted to the ceiling above the registers. The local news was wrapping up. The anchor, a young woman with too much blush on her cheeks, held up a cue card and smiled stiffly. "And now, the Powerball numbers," she announced. I didn't even look at first. After so many losing tickets, disappointment had dulled the excitement a long time ago. I pulled my ticket from my pocket anyway, out of habit more than hope, and glanced up. 16, the anchor said. My heart gave a small, cautious flutter. 16, my number. 28, I sucked in a breath. 5, my fingers tightened around the card handle. 13, a small noise escaped my throat, a whimper maybe, or a prayer. 22, the blood roared in my ears. And the Powerball is 9! I stared at the screen, frozen. The numbers echoed inside my head. 16, 28, 5, 13, 22, 9. I looked down at my crumpled ticket. Every number matched. Every single one. A dizzy wave swept over me, and the world tilted sharply to the left. The fluorescent lights above blurred into a hazy white cloud. My knees buckled. Someone shouted, but the sound was muffled, as if underwater. The last thing I felt was my cart slipping away from me, and then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, the room was spinning. The harsh scent of antiseptic filled my nostrils, and for a second, I didn't know where I was. Panic clawed up my throat. My hands scrambled over the thin hospital blanket, searching blindly. "My purse," I rasped. A nurse appeared from the blur, her voice soft. "You're safe, ma'am. Everything's here." I didn't believe her, not until I spotted it, my old battered handbag sitting on the little table beside the bed. My heart lurched painfully as I reached for it, my fingers trembling. Inside, tucked away where I had hidden it, was the lottery ticket, a little wrinkled, a little worse for wear, but untouched. Still mine, still real. I pressed it against my chest, feeling the hard truth of it against my pounding heart. A soft knock at the door startled me. A young doctor, barely old enough to shave, entered holding a clipboard. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said with a cautious smile, "you gave everyone quite a scare." I tried to sit up straighter, but my body betrayed me. My limbs were heavy, my chest tight. "You've got a strong case of the flu," he continued, flipping through papers. "Severe dehydration, weakness, and your age doesn't make recovery easier. It's going to take months to get your strength back." Months. The word hit harder than I expected. I nodded numbly, not trusting my voice. The doctor said a few more things about medications and rest, but I barely heard him. I was too busy staring at my purse, still gripping the strap like a lifeline. I should tell David, I thought. He's my son, my only family. For a fleeting moment, I pictured him rushing to my side, hugging me, saying he was glad I was all right. That's what sons were supposed to do, wasn't it? I reached for my phone, my fingers clumsy on the buttons. The call was short. He answered on the third ring. Yeah, Ma, what's going on? His voice was brisk, impatient. I swallowed hard. David, I'm at the hospital. I fainted. They say it's the flu. Pretty bad. There was a long pause. Too long. All right, he said finally. I'll come by. No warmth, no panic, no, are you okay? Just cold words sliding like ice down my spine. It took him 3 hours to show up. When he walked in, his eyes didn't even sweep over me to see if I was all right. He stood at the foot of the bed, hands jammed into the pockets of his expensive coat, looking like he had 100 better places to be. I'm fine, I said softly, forcing a smile. Weak, but I have something important to... He waved a hand, cutting me off. Look, Ma, we need to talk about getting you into a facility. I blinked. A facility? A place where they can take care of you properly. You can't stay alone anymore. Not after this. But David, He wasn't listening. He was already pulling out his phone, scrolling through something. There's a few nursing homes in town, he muttered. I'll find one that takes Medicare. We need to resolve this quickly. Resolve this, like I was some kind of burden to be dealt with. The words sliced through me sharper than any scalpel. I shrank back against the pillows, my throat too tight to speak. I wanted to tell him about the ticket, about how everything could be different now, about how I could afford the best doctors, the best care, hell, even a private nurse if I wanted. But looking at him, his hurried fingers, his furrowed brow, his sheer detachment, the words froze on my tongue. He didn't want me to get better. He wanted me gone. I don't remember much of the ride. They wheeled me out of the hospital bundled in a coat too thin for the biting air. I sat slumped in the wheelchair, clutching my handbag like it contained my very soul. Maybe it did. David didn't say much on the way. He tapped away on his phone, barely glancing at me. The only time he looked up was to mutter, "Almost there," as if he were delivering a package. Sunny Pines Care Home. That was the name painted on the cracked sign hanging above a battered front door. I knew before we even crossed the threshold that this wasn't a place meant for healing. It smelled of bleach and stale air. The front desk was unmanned. A television blared cartoons in the corner for no one in particular. A heavy-set nurse with tired eyes signed some papers David pushed in front of her. She didn't ask my name. She barely looked at me. David patted my shoulder once, a gesture so hollow it made my stomach turn, and left without a backward glance. The nurse didn't say much either, just wheeled me down a narrow, dimly lit hallway. The carpet was stained, the walls were scuffed. I caught glimpses of people, frail, hollow-eyed figures slumped in wheelchairs, staring at nothing. "This is you," the nurse said, pushing open a door. My room was the size of a broom closet. A single metal-framed bed sagged in the center. The walls were stained yellow with water damage, and the window barely let in any light. In one corner, a tiny table leaned precariously to one side, like it might give up and collapse at any moment. The smell of mildew and cleaning chemicals made my nose wrinkle. "There's dinner at 6, the nurse said. "Lights out at 9, and then she was gone. I sat there for a long time, my handbag clutched tightly in my lap. The lottery ticket pressed against my side like a heartbeat, proof that I didn't belong here, proof that I still had a way out. When the dinner bell rang, I forced myself up and shuffled to the dining hall. The meal was a tray of what looked like microwaved leftovers, rubbery chicken, cold mashed potatoes, overcooked green beans that smelled faintly of old socks. I took a seat at an empty table, the legs of the chair wobbling under my weight. "First day?" an old man croaked from 2 tables over. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. "Don't worry," he said with a sad smile. "You'll get used to being forgotten." All around me, people ate in silence. Some stared blankly at their trays. Others pushed food around without tasting it. A woman in a faded pink sweater mumbled to herself, rocking back and forth. A thin man with shaking hands tried, and failed, to lift his fork to his mouth. My heart broke. Not for me, for them. Left here like broken toys, forgotten, discarded. The next morning, I wandered the common areas, trying to find some spark of life. I met Mary, who spoke only of the husband who hadn't visited in 7 years. I met Thomas, who once ran a hardware store, but now couldn't remember what city he lived in. I met June, who showed me a photo of a boy, her grandson, she said, who never called. I listened to their stories, nodding, smiling when I could. Each one left a deeper mark on my soul. By noon, the truth was too heavy to ignore. David hadn't brought me here because he cared. He didn't think I was sick enough to need real help. He thought I was a problem to be stored away, just like the others. If it hadn't been for that piece of paper in my bag, that miracle ticket, I would have ended up just like them. Another forgotten body in a crumbling home. Another face no one came to visit. That night, as I lay on the lumpy mattress staring at the cracked ceiling, I made a decision. I wasn't going to rot here. Not today. Not ever. I was getting out. I knew I had to be smart. No one here would believe I had a future outside these crumbling walls. They saw me as another frail old woman, too broken to fight back. Let them think that. Let them think I was harmless. The first step was getting out. "Excuse me," I said to the woman behind the front desk the next morning. Her name tag said Sharon, but she barely looked up from her crossword puzzle. "Yeah?" she grunted. "I need to go to the bank," I said, summoning every ounce of frailty I could fake. I have some bills that need paying. Important ones. I don't want to fall behind." She sighed, tapping her pen against the counter. "Family can handle that, can't they?" "My son," I said, forcing a tremor into my voice. "He's busy." At the word son, she gave a sympathetic grunt. The kind people reserve for sad cases they don't really want to deal with. "I'll have to get approval," she said. It took 2 full days. 2 days of begging, filling out forms, waiting for some supervisor to rubber stamp a permission slip like I was a schoolgirl needing to use the bathroom. But finally, they agreed to let a staff member escort me, a young nurse named Becky, who smelled like bubblegum and barely paid attention to anything I said. The morning of the bank trip, I dressed carefully in my best, which wasn't much, and tucked my handbag tight under my arm. Every step to that bank felt like walking a tightrope. If Becky noticed my tension, she didn't comment. She dropped me off at the front entrance and said she'd wait in the parking lot. "Rules," she said. "Liability reasons. Fine by me." Inside, the bank was cool and bright, polished floors shining under the fluorescent lights. The place smelled of fresh coffee and printer ink, the smell of normalcy, of freedom. I went straight to the first teller I saw. "I need to speak with a manager." "Please," I said, my voice low, urgent. The young woman blinked, looking me over. Another old woman clutching a battered purse, but something in my eyes must have convinced her. She nodded and disappeared into the back. A few minutes later, a tall man in a crisp navy suit came out. His name tag read, Mr. Caldwell, branch manager. He smiled, the polite but distant smile bankers reserve for minor nuisances. "How can I help you today, ma'am?" I leaned in, keeping my voice barely above a whisper. "I won the lottery," I said. His eyebrows twitched upward, but he recovered quickly. "I see," he said carefully. "Ed, would you like to step into my office?" Once the door closed behind us, I pulled the ticket from my handbag, still tucked safely inside a plastic sandwich bag to protect it. He leaned over it, squinting, then sat back, visibly rattled. "I need help," I said, folding my hands in my lap to hide the way they shook. "Real help. I can't let anyone else know, especially not my family." He didn't ask questions. He didn't patronize me. Instead, he picked up the phone and made one quiet call. "Michael," he said, "I need you down here. It's urgent." Less than 15 minutes later, a second man walked into the room. This one was older, with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense air. He carried a leather briefcase that looked more expensive than my entire wardrobe. "This is Mr. Whitaker," the manager said. "He's an attorney. Trustworthy." Mr. Whitaker sat down across from me and folded his hands. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said calmly, "you've just become one of the most interesting people in Spokane today, and I'm here to make sure you stay safe and very, very invisible." I nodded, relief flooding me for the first time in what felt like weeks. Maybe, just maybe, I was finally taking my life back. Everything started moving faster after that day at the bank. Mr. Whitaker didn't waste time. He handled everything. The claim, the legal protections, the setup of private accounts. All discreet, all safe. "First rule," he said during one of our secret meetings in a side room at the bank. "No one needs to know what you have. Not your family, not your friends. Not even your dog if you had one." I smiled at that. A real smile, the first in a long time. Within days, the papers were filed. My winnings were secured under a newly created trust fund, masked under layers of confidentiality agreements. Not even the lottery office could publicly release my name. Mr. Whitaker worked miracles, and I trusted him. The next step was getting out of Sunny Pines. I sat with a doctor, one hand still gripping my handbag, and presented new medical documents Mr. Whitaker arranged. They stated I had the financial means to hire private care and no longer needed to stay in an institutional setting. The administrator didn't argue. She barely looked up from her computer as she clicked through forms. "Well, you're free to go then," she said flatly. No party, no farewell. No one even offered a handshake. Becky, the bubblegum nurse, wheeled me to the front door with the same careless efficiency she had shown when she brought me in. I didn't look back. A black town car waited at the curb. The driver, a man in a dark suit, opened the door with a small nod. I climbed in, my heart hammering in my chest, half afraid someone would come running after me, dragging me back to that prison. But no one did. The car pulled away from Sunny Pines, and I watched through the window as the crumbling building grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared altogether. Good riddance. The next few days were a blur of quiet triumphs. First, the house. A stunning single-story property nestled in a gated community on the edge of Spokane. White stone exterior, wide glass windows, lush green lawns meticulously trimmed, privacy, peace, safety. I walked through the halls in a daze, gleaming hardwood floors under my feet, a kitchen with marble counters, a sunroom overlooking a private garden. It was more than I ever dreamed I could afford, but now it was mine. Then the car. A sleek, deep blue Cadillac, brand new, smelling of leather and possibilities. The salesman had smiled politely when I paid cash, trying to hide his surprise. Another old woman with a hidden fortune. Let them wonder. I moved into the house without fanfare. No neighbors dropping by with welcome baskets. No curious faces peeking over fences. That's what I wanted, to disappear into a quiet life. I bought new clothes, cozy furniture, stocked the kitchen with all my favorite foods. I filled the house with warm blankets, candles that smelled of vanilla and cinnamon, soft music floating through the air. And I did it all without calling David, without telling him a thing. For once, my life was mine alone. And for the first time in a very long time, I slept through the night without fear and without regret. I had no intention of telling David anything. After all the silence, after all the indifference, he didn't deserve to know. Instead, I turned my thoughts back to the ones who had been forgotten alongside me, the ones I had left behind at Sunny Pines. I remembered the soft-spoken woman, Mary, who had said wistfully, "I just wish I had more paints, bigger canvases too. I miss real color." I remembered Thomas, the man who could barely hold a fork but lit up when he spoke about his dream of having a television of his own. Not just the broken communal one in the lounge. I remembered June, whose tired eyes had brightened only once, when she said, "It would be nice to have more board games, you know. Something to make us feel like we're still living. Small wishes, modest dreams, dreams the world had told them were too much to ask. I couldn't save them all, but I could give them something back." So, I did. A few anonymous deliveries, scattered over 2 weeks, giant, vibrant canvases and boxes of acrylic paints in every shade imaginable. A brand new television installed in Thomas's tiny room, complete with a remote that was easier for trembling hands to use. A massive donation of games, checkers, cards, puzzles, and new sturdy tables set up in the rec room. No notes, no signatures, just gifts, appearing like little pieces of magic. I imagined their faces, the surprise, the laughter, the tiny sparks of joy. And for the first time in what felt like decades, I felt a piece of my heart stitch itself back together. Of course, secrets don't stay secrets for long. Rumors started swirling through Sunny Pines almost immediately. They whispered about the rich old lady who had vanished one morning and suddenly showered them with presents. It didn't take long for word to seep into the world outside those cracked walls. And eventually, it reached David. It was almost a month after I left when he finally showed up at Sunny Pines, no doubt after piecing together half-truths and desperate gossip. But by then, I was long gone. All he found was a plain envelope left behind at the front desk. Inside, my new address, scribbled in my neat handwriting. No letter, no explanation. I wanted to see how long it would take for him to come find me. Turns out, it didn't take long at all once he smelled money. One crisp afternoon, as the autumn leaves tumbled across my driveway, a knock echoed through the quiet of my new home. I knew who it was before I even opened the door. David stood there, hands shoved in his pockets, a strained smile plastered across his face. "Mom?" he said, trying to sound casual. "You moved? Why didn't you tell me?" I stepped aside just enough to let the sunlight frame him, but not enough to invite him in. "I didn't think you'd be interested," I said, my voice calm, steady. "You made it very clear you were done with me." His smile faltered. "I'm your son," he said, almost accusingly. "And when I needed you," I answered, "you put me in a warehouse for the dying." The words hung between us like smoke, heavy and choking. "I didn't know," he started, but I cut him off. "I won the lottery, David," I said, my voice cold and sharp like winter air. "All by myself." He stared at me, stunned. I leaned on the doorframe, my eyes never leaving his. "You left me when you thought I was nothing," I said quietly. "Now, the feeling is mutual." And with that, I closed the door, softly, firmly. I thought slamming the door would be the end of it. I thought David would walk away, wounded pride dragging him back into whatever life he had built without me. But I underestimated him. Or maybe I overestimated myself. The next morning, the first call came. I stared at the phone buzzing on the kitchen counter, David's name flashing across the screen like a ghost I couldn't quite banish. I let it ring. The next day, it rang again, and again. Sometimes he left messages. Sometimes he just hung up. Each time, his voice grew a little softer, a little more desperate. "Hey, Ma, just checking in. Hope you're doing okay. Ma, I was thinking about you. Maybe I could stop by. I miss you, Ma." The flowers started arriving after a week. First, a modest bouquet of yellow daisies, my favorite, though I never told him that. Then a larger arrangement. Roses, lilies, sunflowers, enough blooms to fill the house with their sweet, heavy scent. Little gifts followed. A soft scarf in my favorite shade of blue. A box of chocolates wrapped with a silver ribbon. A framed photo of us, from years ago, before life had worn so many cracks into our smiles. At first, I left everything unopened. But the silence in the house grew louder, day by day. The radio no longer filled the rooms the way it used to. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway felt like a hammer striking steel. Loneliness seeped through the walls, no matter how tightly I closed the windows. And so, one morning, I answered the call. "Hi, Ma," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Can I come by, just to talk?" Against my better judgment, I agreed. He came in carrying a bag of groceries, fresh fruits, a loaf of artisanal bread, a jar of homemade jam, things I hadn't even asked for. He sat at the kitchen table, fidgeting with a napkin, looking awkward and unsure. For the first time in a long time, he didn't rush me. He asked about my day. He listened when I spoke, and part of me, the part that remembered kissing scraped knees and packing school lunches, wanted so badly to believe. Maybe he regretted what he had done. Maybe he realized what he almost lost. Maybe, just maybe, he still loved me. The visits became more frequent. He would bring takeout and we'd sit by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about his job, his struggles, his regrets. He laughed at my jokes, real, belly-deep laughs that I hadn't heard from him since he was a boy. Little by little, the walls I had built around my heart started to crack. I told myself to stay guarded. I told myself he was only back because he wanted something. But late at night, when the house grew too still and the memories clawed at the edges of my mind, another voice whispered, "Maybe he's changed. Maybe this time will be different." And oh, how desperately I wanted to believe it. At first, it seemed innocent. David started showing up with more than just flowers and groceries. He brought smoothies he claimed were packed with vitamins, homemade desserts, a little sweet treat to lift your spirits, bottles of herbal supplements, all wrapped up with bright labels boasting natural healing powers. "You need to take better care of yourself, Ma," he'd say, flashing that same boyish grin that used to melt me when he was 5 years old. And I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that he was trying to make up for lost time, that he was trying, in his own clumsy way, to be a good son. So, when he handed me a glass of green juice one afternoon, I didn't hesitate. It tasted bitter, sharp, but I drank it anyway, smiling weakly when he asked if I liked it. Minutes later, the room tilted. A wave of nausea slammed into me. Cold sweat broke out across my skin. My hands trembled so violently the glass slipped from my fingers and shattered on the floor. "David!" I gasped, but the words tangled in my throat. I stumbled toward the counter, my knees buckling. The last thing I saw before the world went black was his face. Wide eyes, mouth moving in a silent scream, and then nothing. When I woke up, the hospital lights were too bright, too sterile. Machines beeped softly around me. A nurse adjusted an IV in my arm, offering a tight smile. "You had a reaction, Mrs. Sullivan," she said. "Allergic, most likely." "Allergic?" I blinked up at her, confusion clouding my mind. I've never had allergies," I whispered. She shrugged. "Sometimes they develop later in life. You're lucky it wasn't worse." Lucky. That word rattled in my skull like a loose bolt. David was there, hovering by the door, wringing his hands. He looked concerned. Too concerned. "Thank God you're okay, Ma," he said, rushing to my side. I was so scared. He squeezed my hand. His grip was a little too tight. I stared at him, searching his face for something, anything, that would make sense of what had happened. Surely he didn't mean for this to happen. Surely he wouldn't hurt me. Would he? A cold knot formed in my stomach, twisting tighter with every breath. "No, he's your son. He loves you, doesn't he?" But another voice, colder, sharper, whispered from the corners of my mind. "He left you once when he thought you were a burden. What makes you think he wouldn't do it again, if he thought there was something to gain?" I closed my eyes, pretending to rest, pretending to believe. But deep inside, the seed of doubt had already taken root, and it was growing. When I was discharged from the hospital, David insisted on taking charge. "You can't be alone, Ma," he said, his tone firm, almost parental. "You need real care. Someone who knows what they're doing." I wanted to argue, but my body still felt too weak, my mind too foggy, and somewhere, buried under all the fear, there was a tiny part of me that still wanted to believe he was trying to help. So, when he introduced me to Marla, a private nurse he had hired, I forced a smile. She was a thin woman with pale skin stretched tight over sharp cheekbones. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She wore a neat white uniform, her hair pinned into a severe bun, and moved with the precision of someone who didn't waste steps or words. "Don't worry, Mrs. Sullivan," she said, her voice smooth like cold syrup. "I'm here to make sure you get exactly what you need." At first, I tried to accept it. She brought me trays of food at strict hours. She handed me tiny paper cups filled with colorful pills, explaining in vague terms that they were for my heart or for my nerves. She hovered near me constantly, always watching, always waiting. It wasn't just the medications. It was the way she would stand too close when she thought I wasn't looking, the way her eyes would flick to my handbag, the one that never left my side, when she thought I was asleep. The house no longer felt like mine. It felt like a prison, and I was the inmate. Every time I asked about a pill, she would brush me off. "Just take it, dear. Doctor's orders." But I hadn't seen a doctor. Not one. One night, long after Marla thought I had drifted off under her careful sleeping aids, I woke up. My body felt like lead, my mind slow and syrupy. But somehow, a sliver of consciousness pushed through the fog. I heard her, in the hallway, on the phone. Her voice was low, urgent, but the words cut through the haze like knives. "Today she'll sleep heavy," she said. "Tomorrow she won't wake up." The blood in my veins turned to ice. I forced my eyes closed again. Heart pounding so loudly I was sure she could hear it. Every instinct screamed at me. Stay still, stay quiet, stay alive. Lying there, helpless and trapped inside my own body, I realized the horrifying truth. This wasn't just about forgetting my pills. This wasn't about being overcautious. This was about getting rid of me. For good. I don't know how I found the strength. My body felt like it was made of sand, crumbling, slipping, barely held together by fear. But somehow, some desperate part of me still clawed toward survival. I waited, listening to Marla's footsteps fade down the hallway, waited for the house to fall silent. Then, I moved. Every step was agony. My legs barely obeyed me. My vision blurred and doubled. But I clutched my handbag to my chest, the same way I clutched my last scraps of hope, and staggered toward the front door. The lock felt like an impossible puzzle, my fingers fumbling clumsily with the knob. But by some miracle, it turned. The cold night air hit me like a slap across the face, sharp, brutal, alive. I stumbled down the porch steps, my shoes scraping against the concrete. The stars above me blurred and spun, but I kept moving. One step, another, another. Somewhere behind me I thought I heard a door creak open. Panic shot through me, sharper than any drug they could have pumped into my veins. I broke into a lurching run, heart pounding so hard it drowned out everything else. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I had to get away. The streets were empty, dark houses, silent driveways, the whole world asleep while I fought for my life. Then, like a beacon, I saw it, a convenience store. Its fluorescent lights buzzing against the darkness like a lighthouse. I crashed through the door, nearly collapsing onto the grimy floor. The clerk, a teenager with wide, startled eyes, jumped back. "Ma'am, are you okay?" I tried to speak, but all that came out was a ragged whisper. "Help me," I gasped. "Please, call the police." He fumbled for the phone, eyes darting nervously between me and the empty parking lot outside. Within minutes, sirens cut through the night air. Red and blue lights painted the store walls as two officers burst through the door. They wrapped a blanket around me, guided me to a bench, asked gentle but urgent questions. I told them everything, about the pills, the drinks, the care that wasn't care at all. At first, I saw skepticism flicker in their eyes. An old woman, confused, maybe paranoid. But when I handed over the plastic pill bottles Marla had been forcing on me, their faces changed, fast. Within hours, detectives were at my house. They searched, they interviewed, and they found what they needed. Switches in my prescriptions, unauthorized medications hidden in kitchen drawers, handwritten notes detailing dosages, increasing steadily. It wasn't meant to heal me. It was meant to kill me, slowly, quietly, in a way that could be written off as natural causes. David's fingerprints were all over everything. His authorization forms, his emails, even bank transfers to Marla labeled as healthcare services. The plan was clear: take everything from me and leave me dead before anyone thought to ask questions. But I was still here, still breathing, and this time, I was the one holding the cards. The day of the hearing arrived with cold gray skies and a steady drizzle that seemed to seep into my bones. I sat stiffly in the courtroom, the hard wooden bench pressing against my back, my hands folded tightly in my lap. The room smelled like old paper and disinfectant, filled with low murmurs and the scratch of pens against legal pads. David sat across from me, at the defendant's table. He looked small, smaller than I remembered. He wore a wrinkled suit and a tie that hung too loose around his neck, like a child playing dress-up in a world far too serious for him. For a moment, just a moment, my heart twisted. This was my son, the same boy I had rocked to sleep, the same boy who had once clung to my hand crossing the street, trusting me to protect him from the world. But the man sitting there now was not that boy. He had become something colder, something I no longer recognized. The charges were read aloud in a voice that echoed through the high ceilings. Attempted homicide, criminal conspiracy, elder abuse. Each word landed like a blow. David didn't look at me, not once. When they called me to the stand, my legs trembled slightly as I stood, but my voice did not. I told the truth. How he had tried to isolate me, how he had orchestrated the medications, how he had smiled and lied and planned my death as easily as if he were arranging a dinner reservation. I didn't cry, not even when they played the recordings from the store clerk, not even when they showed the forged documents. And when the judge finally ordered him to stand, when the bailiff stepped forward and clamped cold metal cuffs around his wrists, I sat perfectly still. I didn't look away. David turned once, maybe hoping to see some flicker of forgiveness in my face, some sign that, despite everything, I would reach out for him. But I didn't, because whatever love had once lived inside me for him, that blind, desperate love only a mother can feel, had died the night he tried to kill me. What remained was something quieter, heavier, a mourning not for the man he had become, but for the boy he had been, and for the mother I had been, the one who had believed he would never hurt her. As the courtroom doors slammed shut behind him, a strange emptiness settled into my chest. Not victory, not triumph, just silence. After the trial, I had choices to make. I could have disappeared, bought a beach house somewhere warm, and spent my days sipping cocktails and forgetting the past. But that wasn't who I was. That had never been who I was. So instead, I started giving back. I used the money not just to rebuild my life, but to rebuild lives around me. I went back to Sunny Pines first, the place where I had once been discarded like an old sweater no one wanted. I didn't just throw money at it. I tore it down to its foundation and started over. I hired real staff, nurses who smiled and listened, caretakers who treated every resident like family, not obligations. We repainted the walls in bright colors. We built gardens, brought in therapy animals, installed a library filled with large print books. Every room got a television. Every resident got their dignity back. And it wasn't just Sunny Pines. I funded new senior homes across the state. Real homes, not warehouses. Places filled with laughter, music, art, places where the forgotten could be remembered. Every month, I sent anonymous donations to shelters, food banks, clinics, every dollar a quiet rebellion against the coldness that had tried to kill me. I traveled too, not to escape, but to see, to stand on mountaintops and breathe in the thin air, to walk through bustling markets and feel life pulse around me, to remind myself that the world was still big and I was still part of it. But no matter where I went, I never forgot him. David. Every month, like clockwork, I visited the prison. I sat across the scratched glass partition, picked up the heavy phone, and looked into the tired, hollow eyes of the boy I once rocked to sleep. He never said much. Neither did I. Sometimes, he apologized, words tumbling out of him like broken glass. Sometimes, he just sat there, staring, and every time, I listened. Because despite everything, he was still my son. Love doesn't always die cleanly. Sometimes it limps along, bruised and battered, but still breathing. Maybe that was the final lesson life had to teach me. Now, most mornings, I sit on my new porch. A cup of strong coffee warming my hands, the breeze tugging gently at my hair. The world feels wide open again, a little quieter, a little lonelier, but mine. I sip my coffee slowly, watching the sunrise spill gold across the sky. And for the first time in years, I smile, really smile, without sadness or fear. Because I lost a son, but somewhere along the way, I found myself. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.